What have you wanted to talk about, but no one has yet asked the right question?
Why do we have classes at all? This is one of these things where, like, when we originally designed Path of Exile 1, we actually wanted to have a classless system. I was actually very inspired by Dungeon Siege 1. That's another game that I cared a lot about. I played a lot of when I was younger. And that game actually didn't have classes. They just had skills that you got better at by using them again and again. And the problem that that you run into, in my opinion, with that kind of stuff is that you don't have any thought to latch your idea of how to design a character on. If you show someone a ranger, they're like, I immediately know what kind of thing I want to do with that. I've got ideas of how I might want to take that and so on. So, like, giving people stereotypes to latch onto is actually a super important thing in game design in general to be able to inspire their creativity. You need to start from a point. So that's actually something that I think is super important, and something that, like, once again, the reason we have all these classes, even though our actual philosophy is around the ability to be free to choose whatever skill you want on, like, we actually, as a technical matter, do allow you to use or like you can, the passive tree is all unified, so you can go all around it in different places. The skills can be used anywhere, and the items obviously just require requirements, but you can get those. Like, in general, we try to be very open. So really, the classes are not actually doing very much at all at the beginning of the game. They just guide your initial starting choices slightly. So yeah, really, the main purpose of a class is to be a stereotype. To give you something to think about as you design your character, and most people will just latch onto that stereotype and run with it, and that kind of means that they've got that way. So yeah, that's kind of the reason why we do that.
That's actually, because I come from a theatre background and then mostly into an acting background, there's a thing called Jungian archetypes, and it's very, very similar. The idea that you're almost shortcutting what the audience already know with characters that you make. So the Jungian archetypes would be the mentor character within a story is normally a wizened old man with a beard. That's why you look at Gandalf. That's why you look at Dumbledore. That's why you look at Obi-Wan Kenobi. And then you'd say that actually the plucky young hero has to reject the call to adventure, then something bad happens in their own life, then they get brought into it. That would be your Luke Skywalkers. That would be your Frodos. And then the evil guy is normally a big, powerful warlord clad in black armor. That's why you've got Sauron. That's why you've got Darth Vader. That's why you've got Voldemort. We're using Jungian archetypes when writing a story to effectively shortcut the audience's knowledge, using their kind of preconceived expectations of who they expect to be good and who they expect to be bad, to effectively tell a story in a very surface level way, and then you can get deeper into it. So when you're saying this class is this and this class is that, you're effectively saying to the audience, this person is going to fit this role within your adventure, build into that straight away. Someone in the chat gave a great point that classes were potentially a holdover from the early Dungeons and Dragons adventures, or the early kind of tabletop adventures, where your class was able to do a certain thing within a party and was one part of a whole, and the whole was stronger because everyone was able to do the part specifically. There's actually, this is going to jump to a question later, but we may as well shortcut to it now. I think one of the holdovers from Dungeons & Dragons is the identifying items system. And that is because identifying items, or knowing what an item is before you put it on, is only really relevant if you can put on an unidentified item and it might be cursed. Because that way you're actually giving the player a benefit to identifying before putting it on. You're removing that risk of something negative happening. In Path of Exile 1, there is nothing negative that happens because you just can't put on the unidentified stuff. I see that as an almost superfluous system. It's a system that is, if you were to remove it, yes, you'd have to remove the identifying scrolls and rejig some of the economy, but it wouldn't necessarily change the gameplay a huge amount because people identify rare items based on the graphic of the item. They almost know what it is as soon as they get it. Are there other systems that you have seen and you have looked at and maybe you've reconsidered and said, you know what, this is actually just bogging the game down. We don't need this anymore. And what are those systems?
Well, I do feel like I need to defend identifying items for just a second.
Oh, go on then.
Because, okay, admittedly, the original reason for item identification would be the thing you said with the cursed items, I assume. But the reason in an action RPG that you have identifying items up to this point really is just that you get to double dip the dopamine of, like, okay, something dropped. Oh, hang on a second, what's it going to be? And then you get another moment of what's it going to be, right? It really comes down to that. And it would be very easy to say that, oh, well, what's really the value of that? You could just remove that and it would be fine and items would still be good. But it is actually hard for me to necessarily say that they would be as good as they are now. Like there is actually some little bit of value of that. And the other thing is that in there's also in game design the concept of the near miss. So when you identify an item, you get the ability to have a near miss, which also, as it turns out, feels good to people. Like I saw the mods, I realized that I could like two of the mods were good, but I just needed that third one. I was so close, right? You know what I mean? Like that's like a thing that kind of adds to the joy of identification. Even though it may feel frustrating when you're actually doing it, it is like part of that feeling. And it's actually hard to make that happen at the point where the item drops from the monster. You're kind of too involved in the combat still at that point to really appreciate that particular issue. So that's like sort of like part of the thing. So effectively you get to split apart that like I'm an item thinking about item mode from the kind of like combat mode part. Now, one thing that I would say is that the identification scroll thing in PoE 1 is probably not that useful, which is why in PoE 2 we made it so that you can there's an NPC in town who'll just ID all the items in your inventory. You just click that and it IDs everything. And then we're going to make ID scrolls much rarer because you don't really need very many of them anymore. Like you just use them to ID something that you really care about on the field. So that's kind of where we went with that. So there is some elements of that. But the other thing as well is that we would have, I will mention, if we did have everything dropping ID'd, which would be that we would actually be completely removing the ability to have that experience of identifying and finding something, because item filters would allow you to just only be highlighting the items that exactly fit the description that you were looking for, which means that you would actually then at that point just have like everything that drops is good and everything that doesn't drop is bad, and you're just collecting, like you're just clicking on like there's no like moment of like, is this good or is this bad? It's just like anything that's on the ground, you just pick it up. I don't know that I love that either. Like there's certainly certainly I'm not going to say that item filters are bad, because I was literally the person who proposed and implemented them in the first place. But the thing that though is that I do think you want some room for the ability to like have pick up a rare and then ID it, and then it might be good or it might be bad. And that's still an experience I want to deliver. And so in PoE 2, we're improving the ability for that to happen. Like in PoE 1, the average rare on the ground is just garbage, and there's no point in even identifying it by the time you get to endgame. That's something that I want to fix, because I still like that experience of identifying an item and it might be good and it might be bad. So yeah, that's my defensive identification for you there.
That was great. No, and everyone's really happy that there'll be a character in town that's able to identify the items for you. Right. Fantastic. People are loving that. We're kind of asking these questions to delve in and maybe get little tidbits of information that you haven't told other people. That's my plan. I'm going to be very overt about that. I'm trying to get you to admit to things that maybe you haven't told anyone else. We'll try and trick you up. That's the honest, genuine plan.